In the summer of 1889, deep within the most isolated valleys of the Arkansas Ozarks, a traveling census taker named Jonathan Hartwell made a discovery that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about human genetics and survival. What he found hidden in a remote hollow, accessible only by treacherous mountain paths known to few, was a family whose bloodline had been so thoroughly corrupted by generations of inbreeding that they had evolved into something that barely resembled humanity. The Crowley clan had been living in complete isolation for over a century, practicing extreme inbreeding that should have resulted in their extinction within 3 generations. Yet not only had they survived, they had developed characteristics so disturbing and unnatural that Hartwell's detailed reports would be classified by the Arkansas State Medical Board and hidden from public view for nearly 8 decades. Before we delve into this extraordinary case that shocked the scientific community and forced lawmakers to confront the darkest possibilities of human genetic manipulation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into history's most disturbing mysteries. And please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with fellow truth seekers around the world who aren't afraid to confront the most unsettling chapters of human history. The Arkansas Ozarks in 1889 were a world unto themselves, a vast wilderness of ancient mountains, deep valleys, and impenetrable forests that had remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. These rugged highlands harbored communities that had been cut off from civilization for so long that they had developed their own languages, customs, and ways of life that bore little resemblance to the outside world. The region was known among geologists and naturalists as one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, with rock formations that dated back over 300 million years. The ancient limestone caves and underground river systems created a labyrinthine landscape where entire communities could exist without ever being discovered by the outside world. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the laws of civilization held no sway, and where the darkest impulses of human nature could flourish unchecked. It was in this isolated region that the Crowley family had established their settlement in 1781, when the patriarch, Ezekiel Crowley, had led his wife and 6 children into the deepest recesses of the mountains to escape what he claimed were religious persecutions in the eastern settlements. But according to local folklore and fragmentary historical records, Ezekiel Crowley had fled not because of his religious beliefs, but because of accusations of witchcraft, devil worship, and practices so abhorrent that even the rough frontier communities of the time could not tolerate them. The historical records that survived from this period painted a disturbing picture of Ezekiel Crowley and his family. Court documents from colonial Virginia described him as a man who had been accused of practicing dark magic, conducting blasphemous rituals, and engaging in what witnesses described as unnatural relations with his own family members. Multiple testimonies spoke of strange lights emanating from the Crowley homestead at night, of animals found dead and mutilated in ritualistic patterns, and of children who displayed abilities and behaviors that seemed to exceed the boundaries of normal human development. Ezekiel Crowley was described in contemporary accounts as a man of unusual appearance and disturbing demeanor, standing nearly 7 feet tall with pale, almost translucent skin and eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. Those who had encountered him spoke of his uncanny ability to predict future events, his apparent immunity to diseases that killed others, and most disturbingly, his practice of what witnesses described as blood rituals involving his own family members. The colonial authorities had attempted to arrest Crowley on charges of witchcraft and moral corruption, but he had vanished into the wilderness along with his entire family before the warrant could be served. Search parties had been organized to track them down, but the Crowley family had seemingly disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only their abandoned homestead and a collection of disturbing artifacts that the authorities had ordered to be burned. The artifacts discovered at the abandoned Crowley homestead included books written in unknown languages, diagrams that appeared to show human anatomy in impossible detail, and what appeared to be genealogical charts that traced bloodlines back through hundreds of generations. Most disturbing of all were the preserved specimens that seemed to show human body parts with characteristics that did not match any known human anatomy. The Crowley settlement was established in a valley so remote and difficult to access that it remained completely unknown to the outside world for over a century. The valley, which the family called Eden's Hollow, was surrounded by steep cliffs and accessible only through a narrow canyon that could easily be defended against intruders. Within this natural fortress, the Crowley family began a genetic experiment that would produce results beyond the imagination of even the most depraved scientific minds. Eden's Hollow was a geological anomaly that seemed to exist in defiance of the natural laws that governed the surrounding landscape. The valley was significantly warmer than the surrounding mountains, with a microclimate that allowed tropical plants to flourish despite the harsh mountain environment. Underground hot springs provided a constant source of warm water, and the soil was unusually fertile, supporting vegetation that should not have been able to survive at that altitude and latitude. Local Native American tribes had long considered the valley to be cursed ground, a place where the spirits of the dead were trapped and where the natural order had been corrupted by dark forces. According to tribal legends, the valley had been the site of a great battle between good and evil spirits, and the land itself had been permanently tainted by the blood that had been spilled there. The Cherokee elders spoke of ancient prophecies that warned of pale-skinned demons who would come to inhabit the cursed valley, bringing with them practices that would corrupt the very essence of life itself. These demons would breed abominations that would eventually emerge from their hiding place to spread their corruption throughout the world, unless they were stopped by warriors who possessed the spiritual strength to resist their evil influence. From the very beginning, Ezekiel Crowley had forbidden his children from marrying outside the family bloodline. He claimed that their family possessed special gifts and abilities that would be diluted or lost entirely if they bred with outsiders. To preserve what he called the purity of their bloodline, he instituted a system of mandatory inbreeding that required brothers to marry sisters, fathers to mate with daughters, and mothers to bear children by their own sons. The system that Ezekiel established was far more complex and systematic than simple incestuous relationships. He had developed what he called the Sacred Breeding Protocol, a detailed set of rules and procedures that governed every aspect of reproduction within the clan. This protocol specified which family members could mate with whom, when these matings should take place, and what rituals and ceremonies should be performed to ensure the desired genetic outcomes. The Sacred Breeding Protocol was based on Ezekiel's belief that human genetics operated according to spiritual as well as physical laws, and that the proper combination of bloodlines could produce offspring with supernatural abilities. He claimed to have received this knowledge through direct revelation from entities that he described as the Ancient Ones, beings of immense power and wisdom who had existed since before the creation of the world. According to Ezekiel's teachings, the Ancient Ones had chosen the Crowley bloodline to serve as vessels for their return to the physical world. Through careful breeding and the concentration of specific genetic traits, the family would eventually produce offspring who could serve as hosts for these powerful entities, allowing them to manifest in physical form and reclaim dominion over the earth. This extreme form of genetic isolation continued generation after generation, with each successive patriarch enforcing the same rigid breeding restrictions. The family developed elaborate genealogical records that tracked bloodlines with scientific precision, ensuring that the most genetically similar individuals were paired together to produce offspring that carried the highest concentration of family traits. The genealogical records maintained by the Crowley clan were works of obsessive detail that documented every birth, death, and mating within the family over the course of more than a century. These records were written in a combination of English and symbols that appeared to be derived from various ancient languages, creating a complex code that could only be interpreted by those who had been trained in the family's secret knowledge. The records revealed that the clan had developed their own system of genetic classification that divided family members into different categories based on their perceived spiritual and genetic value. The highest category consisted of individuals who displayed what the family called the sacred traits, physical and mental characteristics that were believed to indicate the presence of supernatural abilities. These sacred traits included unusual eye colors, particularly eyes that seemed to change color or that reflected light in unnatural ways. They also included physical proportions that deviated from normal human standards, such as unusually long limbs, enlarged heads, or fingers and toes that were webbed or possessed extra joints. Mental traits that were considered sacred included the ability to predict future events, to communicate without speaking, and to influence the behavior of animals and other people. By the time Jonathan Hartwell stumbled upon the Crowley settlement in 1889, the family had been practicing this extreme inbreeding for over a century, producing results that defied everything that medical science understood about human genetics and development. The descendants of Ezekiel Crowley had evolved into creatures that retained human intelligence and consciousness, but possessed physical characteristics that seemed to belong to an entirely different species. The genetic effects of the clan's breeding program had become increasingly pronounced with each successive generation. The first generation of inbred children had displayed relatively minor abnormalities: slightly enlarged heads, unusual eye colors, and enhanced sensory abilities that could have been dismissed as natural variations within the normal range of human development. But as the inbreeding continued and the genetic diversity of the clan decreased, the abnormalities became more severe and more consistent across the population. By the third generation, virtually every child born to the clan displayed significant physical deformities, and many possessed abilities that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of human biology. The fourth and fifth generations had produced individuals whose appearance was so far removed from normal human anatomy that they could barely be recognized as members of the same species. These individuals possessed combinations of traits that should have been incompatible with life, yet they not only survived but often displayed enhanced physical and mental capabilities that exceeded those of normal humans. Hartwell's first encounter with the Crowley clan occurred when he became lost while attempting to conduct a census of the remote mountain communities. Following what appeared to be an old hunting trail, he found himself in a narrow canyon that led deep into the heart of the mountains. As he traveled further into the canyon, he began to notice signs of human habitation: crude tools, animal bones arranged in strange patterns, and symbols carved into the rock walls that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern or meaning. The symbols carved into the canyon walls were unlike anything that Hartwell had encountered in his extensive travels throughout the frontier regions. They appeared to be a mixture of various ancient writing systems, including what looked like Celtic runes, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Native American pictographs, but arranged in patterns that suggested a completely different symbolic language. Some of the symbols seemed to depict human figures, but with anatomical features that were clearly not normal. These figures had multiple arms, enlarged heads, and what appeared to be additional sensory organs that had no counterpart in normal human anatomy. Other symbols showed what looked like genealogical charts, with lines connecting various figures in patterns that suggested complex breeding relationships. The most disturbing symbols were those that seemed to depict ritualistic activities involving human sacrifice and consumption. These images showed figures gathered around altars, where other figures were being dismembered and consumed, with particular attention paid to the consumption of specific organs and body parts. The canyon eventually opened into a hidden valley that took Hartwell's breath away with its natural beauty. Crystal-clear streams flowed through meadows filled with wildflowers, while ancient trees provided shade and shelter from the mountain sun. But as Hartwell explored further into the valley, he began to realize that this apparent paradise harbored secrets that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The valley's unnatural beauty was immediately apparent to anyone who observed it carefully. The vegetation was far too lush and diverse for the climate and altitude, with tropical plants growing alongside temperate species in combinations that should have been impossible. The water in the streams had an unusual clarity and seemed to glow with a faint phosphorescence that was visible even in daylight. The animal life in the valley was equally unusual. Hartwell observed species that he had never seen before, including birds with iridescent feathers that seemed to change color as they moved, and small mammals that displayed behaviors suggesting a level of intelligence that exceeded that of normal animals. Most disturbing of all were the insects, which seemed to be attracted to human presence in ways that suggested they had been conditioned to associate humans with food sources. The first member of the Crowley clan that Hartwell encountered was a figure that he initially mistook for some kind of wild animal. Crouched beside a stream and drinking directly from the water like a beast, the creature appeared to be human, but possessed characteristics that seemed impossible for any natural human being. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, Its head was misshapen and enlarged, and its skin had a pale, almost luminescent quality that made it appear to glow in the dim light of the forest. When the creature noticed Hartwell's presence, it stood upright and revealed itself to be a young woman, though her appearance was so distorted by genetic abnormalities that determining her age or even her gender required careful observation. She spoke to Hartwell in a language that seemed to be a corrupted form of English, mixed with sounds and syllables that belonged to no known human tongue. The woman's speech patterns were particularly disturbing, as they seemed to include sounds that were produced by vocal structures that differed significantly from normal human anatomy. She could produce multiple tones simultaneously, creating harmonics that gave her voice an otherworldly quality. She also seemed to be able to project her voice in ways that made it difficult to determine where the sound was coming from. The woman, who eventually identified herself as Mercy Crowley, led Hartwell deeper into the valley to what she called the family compound. What he found there exceeded his worst nightmares and challenged everything he thought he knew about the limits of human genetic variation. The Crowley compound consisted of a collection of crude structures built from logs, stones, and animal hides, arranged in a circular pattern around a central area that appeared to serve as a communal gathering place. But it was not the primitive architecture that shocked Hartwell, it was the inhabitants themselves. The buildings themselves were architectural anomalies that seemed to have been designed to accommodate inhabitants with non-standard human proportions. Doorways were unusually tall and narrow, windows were positioned at heights that would be uncomfortable for normal humans, and the interior spaces were divided in ways that suggested they were meant to house individuals with significantly different physical characteristics than those of ordinary people. The central gathering area was dominated by a large stone altar that was covered with symbols and stains that suggested it had been used for ritualistic purposes. Around the altar were arranged various artifacts that appeared to be made from human bones and other organic materials, crafted into shapes and patterns that served no obvious functional purpose, but that seemed to have significant symbolic meaning for the clan. The Crowley clan consisted of approximately 40 individuals, ranging in apparent age from infants to elderly adults, but determining precise ages was nearly impossible due to the extreme genetic abnormalities that affected every member of the family. Some individuals appeared to be children, but possessed the facial features and body proportions of adults, while others seemed to be elderly, but moved with the energy and agility of young people. The age determination problem was complicated by the fact that the clan's inbreeding had affected not only their physical appearance, but also their rate of development and aging. Some individuals seemed to mature much more rapidly than normal humans, reaching apparent adulthood while still chronologically children. Others seemed to age much more slowly, retaining youthful appearances well into what should have been their elderly years. The clan had also developed their own system for measuring age and maturity that was based not on chronological time, but on the development of what they called spiritual markers. These markers included the manifestation of supernatural abilities, the achievement of certain levels of genetic purity, and the completion of various ritualistic milestones that marked an individual's progress toward what the clan considered to be the ideal form of human development. The physical characteristics of the clan members varied widely, but all shared certain common traits that marked them as products of extreme inbreeding. Their heads were universally enlarged and misshapen, with prominent foreheads that protruded over deeply set eyes. Their limbs were often disproportionate to their bodies, with some individuals possessing arms that reached nearly to their knees, while others had legs so short that they could barely walk upright. The cranial enlargement that affected all clan members was not simply a matter of increased size, but involved changes in the actual structure and organization of the skull. The bones of the skull had developed additional ridges and protrusions that gave the heads a distinctly non-human appearance, and the brain cavities were enlarged in ways that suggested significant changes in brain structure and organization. The limb abnormalities were equally dramatic, with some individuals possessing arms and legs that were not only disproportionate in length, but also in structure. Some clan members had additional joints in their arms and legs that allowed for a much greater range of motion than was possible for normal humans. Others had fingers and toes that were webbed or that possessed additional digits that seemed to be fully functional. Most disturbing of all were the facial features of the clan members. Years of inbreeding had produced a range of deformities that seemed to represent every possible genetic abnormality that could affect human development. Some individuals had eyes that were set so close together that they appeared to be merging into a single organ, while others had mouths that were so large they seemed to split their faces in half. The eye abnormalities were particularly striking, as they often involved not just changes in position and size, but also in color and structure. Many clan members had eyes that seemed to change color depending on the lighting conditions, shifting from blue to green to amber in ways that suggested fundamental differences in the structure of the iris and pupil. The mouth and dental abnormalities were equally disturbing. Many clan members had teeth that were arranged in multiple rows, like those of sharks, while others had canine teeth that were greatly enlarged and sharpened. Some individuals had tongues that were unusually long and flexible, allowing them to perform tasks that would be impossible for normal humans. But despite their physical abnormalities, the Crowley clan members displayed a level of intelligence and organization that surprised Hartwell. They had developed their own complex social structure, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities for each member of the community. They had also created their own language, which seemed to be a mixture of archaic English, Native American dialects, and sounds that appeared to be entirely original to their isolated community. The clan's social structure was based on a complex hierarchy that took into account not only age and gender, but also genetic purity and the manifestation of supernatural abilities. At the top of the hierarchy was the patriarch, who served as both the political and spiritual leader of the community. Below the patriarch were various levels of elders, breeders, workers, and children, each with their own specific roles and responsibilities. The clan's language was a fascinating example of linguistic evolution in isolation. Over the course of more than a century, they had developed a vocabulary and grammar that incorporated elements from multiple sources, while also creating entirely new words and concepts to describe their unique experiences and beliefs. The language included specific terms for different types of genetic abnormalities, various levels of supernatural ability, and complex kinship relationships that had no equivalent in normal human society. The clan's leader was a figure known as the Patriarch, a title that had been passed down through the male line since the time of Ezekiel Crowley. The current patriarch was a man named Jeremiah Crowley, who claimed to be the great-great-grandson of the original founder, though the extreme inbreeding made it impossible to verify such genealogical claims with any certainty. Jeremiah Crowley was perhaps the most disturbing member of the clan that Hartwell encountered. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with a head so enlarged that it seemed impossible for his neck to support its weight, Jeremiah possessed an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural in its scope and depth. He could discuss complex philosophical and scientific concepts with remarkable sophistication, yet he also displayed behaviors and beliefs that seemed to belong to a much more primitive stage of human development. Jeremiah's physical appearance was a testament to the extremes that the clan's breeding program had achieved. His skull was not only enlarged, but had developed additional bone structures that gave it a distinctly non-human appearance. His eyes were set unusually far apart and seemed to possess an additional layer of tissue that gave them a reflective quality similar to those of nocturnal animals. His limbs were disproportionately long and thin, with joints that seemed to bend in directions that should have been impossible for normal human anatomy. His hands were particularly striking, with fingers that were nearly twice the normal length, and that possessed additional joints that allowed for an extraordinary range of motion and dexterity. According to Jeremiah, the Crowley clan's practice of extreme inbreeding was not simply a matter of isolation or ignorance, but rather a deliberate attempt to preserve and enhance what he called the family's special gifts. He claimed that the original Ezekiel Crowley had possessed supernatural abilities that included telepathy, precognition, and the power to communicate with spirits and other non-human entities. These abilities, Jeremiah explained, were genetic in nature and could only be preserved through careful breeding within the family bloodline. Each generation of inbreeding concentrated these supernatural traits, making them stronger and more pronounced in the offspring. The physical deformities that resulted from this process were simply the price that had to be paid for maintaining the family's otherworldly powers. Jeremiah's explanation of the clan's breeding philosophy revealed a sophisticated understanding of genetics that seemed to exceed what should have been possible for someone living in such isolation. He spoke of dominant and recessive traits, of genetic drift and bottlenecks, and of the mathematical principles that governed the inheritance of complex characteristics. This genetic knowledge was apparently derived from a combination of careful observation of their own breeding results and information that Jeremiah claimed to have received through supernatural means. He spoke of receiving guidance from the spirits of deceased clan members, who provided detailed instructions about which individual should mate with whom to produce offspring with desired characteristics. To demonstrate these claimed abilities, Jeremiah and other clan members performed what they called demonstrations for Hartwell's benefit. These included apparent displays of telepathy, in which clan members seemed to communicate with each other without speaking, and predictions of future events that proved to be remarkably accurate. Most disturbing of all were the seances and spirit communication sessions, during which clan members claimed to receive messages from deceased relatives and other supernatural entities. The telepathic demonstrations were particularly convincing, as they involved complex information transfers that seemed to occur instantaneously between clan members who were separated by significant distances. Hartwell observed instances where one clan member would begin a sentence and another would complete it, despite being out of earshot of each other. The precognitive demonstrations involved predictions of specific future events, including weather changes, the behavior of animals, and even details about Hartwell's own future actions and decisions. These predictions were made with remarkable specificity and proved to be accurate in ways that seemed to exceed what could be explained by chance or careful observation. Hartwell was initially skeptical of these demonstrations, assuming that they were elaborate tricks designed to impress and intimidate outsiders. But as he spent more time with the clan, he began to witness phenomena that he could not explain through conventional means. Objects would move without being touched, voices would speak from empty air, and clan members would display knowledge of events that had occurred far from their isolated valley. The phenomena that Hartwell observed seemed to follow certain patterns and rules that suggested they were genuine supernatural abilities, rather than elaborate deceptions. The telepathic communications seemed to be strongest between closely related clan members and appeared to be enhanced by physical contact or proximity. The precognitive abilities seemed to be most accurate when predicting events that would occur within the immediate vicinity of the valley. The spirit communication sessions were perhaps the most disturbing phenomena that Hartwell witnessed. During these sessions, clan members would enter trance-like states and speak in voices that seemed to belong to other people, often using archaic language and discussing events that had occurred long before their births. The clan's supernatural abilities seemed to be most pronounced in the youngest generation, the children who represented the highest concentration of inbred genetics. These children, some of whom appeared to be barely human in their physical characteristics, displayed mental powers that seemed to exceed anything that Hartwell had ever encountered or imagined. One child, a girl named Prudence, who appeared to be about 10 years old, but possessed the grotesquely enlarged head and distorted features typical of the clan, demonstrated an ability to read Hartwell's thoughts with disturbing accuracy. She could tell him about events from his past that he had never spoken of to anyone, and she seemed to know details about his life and personality that should have been impossible for her to discover. Prudence's telepathic abilities seemed to extend beyond simple mind reading, to include the ability to influence the thoughts and emotions of others. Hartwell found that when he was in her presence, he experienced unusual thoughts and feelings that seemed to originate from outside his own consciousness. She could apparently implant suggestions and ideas that would influence his behavior in subtle but significant ways. Another child, a boy named Ezekiel, who had been named after the clan's founder, displayed what appeared to be precognitive abilities. He could predict with remarkable accuracy when it would rain, when animals would appear in the valley, and even when Hartwell would decide to perform certain actions. His predictions were so consistently accurate that Hartwell began to suspect that the boy was somehow influencing events, rather than simply predicting them. Ezekiel's precognitive abilities seemed to be connected to his unusual relationship with the natural environment. He could apparently sense changes in weather patterns, animal behavior, and even geological activity with a precision that exceeded what should have been possible through normal sensory channels. He seemed to be connected to the valley's ecosystem in ways that allowed him to predict and influence natural events. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the clan's supernatural abilities was their apparent connection to the spirit world. The clan members claimed to be in constant communication with the ghosts of their deceased relatives, who they said provided guidance and instruction for the living. These spirit communications took place during elaborate rituals that involved the entire community and seemed to induce trance-like states in the participants. During these rituals, clan members would speak in voices that seemed to belong to other people, often using archaic language and discussing events that had occurred long before their births. The spirits allegedly provided information about the outside world, warned of approaching dangers, and gave instructions about breeding practices and other aspects of clan life. The spirit communication rituals were elaborate ceremonies that involved the entire clan and seemed to follow specific protocols that had been developed over generations. The rituals typically took place during certain phases of the moon and involved the use of various artifacts and substances that were believed to facilitate communication with the spirit world. During these rituals, clan members would arrange themselves in complex patterns around the central altar, with the most spiritually gifted individuals positioned at specific points that were believed to enhance their ability to receive spirit communications. The rituals would begin with chanting and the burning of various herbs and other substances that produced smoke with unusual colors and properties. As the rituals progressed, individual clan members would begin to enter trance states and would start speaking in voices that were clearly different from their normal speech patterns. These spirit voices would provide information and instructions that seemed to come from deceased clan members who had lived in previous generations. Hartwell was initially convinced that these spirit communications were elaborate performances designed to maintain social control within the clan. But as he observed more of these rituals, he began to notice details that suggested something more genuinely supernatural might be occurring. The information provided by the alleged spirits was often remarkably accurate and detailed, including facts about the outside world that the isolated clan members should have had no way of knowing. The spirits seemed to possess knowledge about historical events, geographical features, and even current political developments that were completely unknown to the living clan members. They could provide detailed descriptions of places that none of the clan had ever visited, and could discuss technological developments that had occurred long after the clan's isolation began. The clan's breeding practices were governed by these spirit communications, with the deceased relatives allegedly providing specific instructions about which individuals should mate with whom to produce offspring with the desired characteristics. The spirits were said to be working toward the creation of what they called the perfect child, a being who would possess all of the clan's supernatural abilities in their most concentrated and powerful form. According to clan mythology, the perfect child would be born when the bloodline had been sufficiently purified through generations of careful inbreeding. This child would possess godlike powers that would allow the clan to emerge from their isolation and take their rightful place as rulers of the outside world. The spirits claimed that this event was approaching rapidly, and that the current generation of children represented the final stage in the clan's genetic evolution. The prophecy of the perfect child was the central organizing principle of clan culture, and the driving force behind their continued commitment to extreme inbreeding. Every aspect of clan life was oriented toward the eventual birth of this prophesied being, from their breeding practices to their religious rituals, to their long-term planning and goal-setting. The clan's obsession with producing the perfect child had led to increasingly extreme breeding practices that pushed the boundaries of human genetic tolerance. Brothers were required to mate with sisters, fathers with daughters, and mothers with sons, often producing multiple offspring from the same genetic combinations. The resulting children displayed such severe abnormalities that many died in infancy, but those who survived were considered to be closer to the desired genetic ideal. The clan maintained detailed genealogical records that tracked every mating and birth over the course of more than a century. These records, written in a mixture of English and the clan's own invented symbols, documented the gradual concentration of genetic traits and the increasing prevalence of supernatural abilities in successive generations. The genealogical records were works of obsessive detail that revealed the systematic nature of the clan's breeding program. Every individual was classified according to their genetic value and their potential contribution to the production of the perfect child. Mating decisions were made based on complex calculations that took into account not only genetic compatibility, but also astrological factors, spiritual guidance, and the results of various divination practices. The records also documented the clan's attempts to enhance their supernatural abilities through various forms of what could only be described as genetic experimentation. They had tried exposing pregnant women to different environmental conditions, feeding them special diets, and subjecting them to various forms of physical and psychological stress in an attempt to influence the development of their unborn children. Some of these experiments had produced children with even more extreme abnormalities than usual, including individuals who seemed to possess multiple sets of organs, limbs that grew in impossible configurations, and sensory abilities that exceeded normal human limitations. These extreme cases were considered by the clan to be either great successes or tragic failures, depending on whether they displayed the desired supernatural abilities. The experimental breeding program had also led to the development of what the clan called bloodline specialization, in which different family branches were bred for different types of supernatural abilities. Some branches were specialized for telepathic abilities, others for precognition, and still others for spirit communication and other forms of supernatural perception. This specialization had created a complex social structure within the clan, with different family branches serving different roles and functions within the community. The telepathic branch served as the clan's communication system. The precognitive branch provided early warning of dangers and opportunities, and the spirit communication branch served as the link between the living and the dead. Hartwell was allowed to examine these records and was shocked by the systematic nature of the clan's breeding program. Every aspect of reproduction was carefully planned and controlled, with the spirits allegedly providing specific guidance about timing, genetic combinations, and even the rituals that should be performed during conception and birth. The breeding records revealed that the clan had achieved a level of genetic control that seemed to exceed what should have been possible without modern scientific techniques. They had successfully concentrated specific traits through selective breeding, eliminated unwanted characteristics, and produced individuals with abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. The records also documented the costs of this genetic manipulation. The clan had experienced extremely high rates of infant mortality, with many children dying shortly after birth due to genetic abnormalities that were incompatible with life. Those who survived often suffered from physical and mental disabilities that would have been considered tragic in any normal human community. But the clan viewed these costs as acceptable sacrifices in pursuit of their ultimate goal of genetic perfection. They believed that each generation brought them closer to producing the perfect child, and they were willing to accept any amount of suffering and death to achieve this objective. The clan's acceptance of genetic abnormalities and infant mortality reflected their fundamentally different understanding of human value and dignity. They viewed individuals not as ends in themselves, but as components in a larger genetic experiment that was designed to produce superhuman beings. This utilitarian approach to human life was reflected in all aspects of clan culture. Individuals were valued primarily for their genetic contributions and their potential to produce offspring with desired characteristics. Those who failed to reproduce or who produced children with undesirable traits were marginalized within the community and sometimes subjected to various forms of punishment or exile. The clan's isolation had also led to the development of unique cultural practices that seemed to be designed to reinforce their genetic breeding program. They had created elaborate rituals around conception, pregnancy, and birth that were believed to influence the supernatural development of children. These rituals often involved the entire community and included elements that seemed to draw from various religious and magical traditions. The conception rituals were particularly elaborate, involving careful timing based on astrological calculations, the use of various herbs and potions that were believed to enhance fertility and genetic expression, and sexual practices that were designed to maximize the concentration of supernatural traits in the resulting offspring. The pregnancy rituals involved subjecting expectant mothers to various forms of physical and psychological conditioning that were believed to influence the development of their unborn children. These practices included exposure to specific types of music and sounds, consumption of special diets that included various herbs and animal products, and participation in group meditation and trance sessions. The birth rituals were the most elaborate of all, involving the entire clan in ceremonies that were designed to welcome the new child into the community and to assess their genetic and spiritual value. These ceremonies included various forms of divination that were used to predict the child's future abilities and role within the clan. The clan's religious beliefs were a bizarre mixture of Christianity, paganism, and their own invented mythology that centered around the worship of their ancestors and the pursuit of genetic perfection. They believed that their inbreeding practices were not only sanctioned by God, but were actually a divine commandment that had been given to the original Ezekiel Crowley through direct revelation. According to clan theology, God had chosen the Crowley family to be the progenitors of a new race of superhuman beings who would eventually inherit the earth. The extreme inbreeding was necessary to concentrate the divine spark that had been placed within their bloodline, and the physical deformities that resulted were simply the growing pains of evolutionary advancement. The clan's religious practices included daily worship services that combined Christian prayers with invocations to their ancestors and various supernatural entities. These services often culminated in group trances, during which clan members claimed to receive direct communications from God, their ancestors, and other spiritual beings. The clan also practiced various forms of what could only be described as genetic worship, treating their genealogical records as sacred texts and performing elaborate ceremonies around the conception and birth of each new child. They believed that every birth brought them closer to the ultimate goal of producing the perfect child, and they celebrated each new genetic abnormality as a sign of progress toward their divine destiny. The clan's worship practices also included various forms of ancestor veneration that involved regular communication with the spirits of deceased family members. These practices were based on the belief that the dead continued to play an active role in guiding the genetic development of the living, and that their wisdom and guidance were essential for the success of the breeding program. The ancestor worship rituals involved elaborate ceremonies that were designed to facilitate communication between the living and the dead. These ceremonies typically took place in the clan's sacred spaces, which were areas of the valley that were believed to be particularly conducive to spirit communication. Hartwell spent several weeks living with the clan, documenting their practices and attempting to understand the full scope of their genetic and cultural evolution. What he discovered challenged not only his understanding of human genetics, but also his beliefs about the nature of consciousness, spirituality, and the limits of human potential. During his stay with the clan, Hartwell was subjected to various tests and evaluations that seemed to be designed to assess his genetic and spiritual value. These tests included exposure to various forms of psychic phenomena, participation in group rituals, and attempts to induce supernatural experiences through meditation, fasting, and other spiritual practices. The clan members seemed to be trying to determine whether Hartwell possessed any latent supernatural abilities that could be awakened through their techniques. They subjected him to various forms of sensory deprivation and enhancement, exposed him to unusual environmental conditions, and attempted to induce altered states of consciousness through various means. During these tests, Hartwell experienced several phenomena that he could not explain through conventional means. He had vivid dreams that seemed to provide accurate information about future events. He experienced apparent telepathic communications with clan members, and he witnessed physical phenomena that seemed to violate the laws of physics. These experiences forced Hartwell to question his understanding of reality and to consider the possibility that the clan's claims about supernatural abilities might be based on genuine phenomena rather than delusion or deception. He began to document these experiences in detail, creating a record that would later become one of the most important sources of information about the clan's abilities and practices. The clan members displayed a range of abilities that seemed to exceed normal human limitations in various ways. In addition to their apparent telepathic and precognitive abilities, they also demonstrated enhanced physical capabilities that seemed to result from their genetic abnormalities. Some individuals possessed strength that was far greater than their size would suggest, while others displayed sensory abilities that allowed them to see, hear, and smell things that were imperceptible to normal humans. The enhanced sensory abilities were particularly striking, as they seemed to involve not just increased sensitivity, but also the ability to perceive types of information that were normally beyond human detection. Some clan members could apparently see electromagnetic fields, hear subsonic and ultrasonic frequencies, and detect chemical signatures that were imperceptible to normal human senses. The clan's enhanced abilities also extended to their intellectual capacities. Despite their isolation and lack of formal education, many clan members displayed remarkable intelligence and creativity. They had developed their own mathematical systems, created complex works of art and literature, and invented technologies that were surprisingly sophisticated given their primitive living conditions. The clan's intellectual achievements included the development of their own philosophical and scientific theories that attempted to explain their supernatural abilities and their genetic evolution. These theories were based on a combination of careful observation, logical reasoning, and information that they claimed to have received through supernatural means. The clan had also developed their own medical practices that seemed to be remarkably effective, despite being based on principles that contradicted conventional scientific understanding. They could treat injuries and illnesses using methods that combined herbal remedies, energy manipulation, and what appeared to be psychic healing techniques. The medical practices of the clan were based on their understanding of what they called the life force, an energy that they believed flowed through all living things, and that could be manipulated to promote healing and enhance physical and mental abilities. They had developed techniques for detecting and directing this life force that seemed to produce genuine therapeutic effects. Most remarkably, the clan seemed to have achieved a form of collective consciousness that allowed them to share thoughts, emotions, and experiences across the entire community. This group mind appeared to be strongest among the most closely related individuals and seemed to be enhanced by their extreme genetic similarity. The collective consciousness manifested itself in various ways, including synchronized behaviors, shared dreams and visions, and the ability to coordinate complex activities without verbal communication. The clan members seemed to function as a single organism, with multiple bodies, each individual serving as a specialized component of a larger whole. This group consciousness also seemed to be connected to their claimed supernatural abilities. The clan members could apparently pool their psychic energies to produce effects that were far more powerful than any individual could achieve alone. During group rituals, they could allegedly move objects, influence weather patterns, and communicate with entities from other dimensions. The collective consciousness was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the clan's evolution, as it seemed to represent a fundamental departure from normal human psychology and social organization. The clan members had apparently sacrificed their individual identities in favor of a group mind that subordinated personal desires and goals to the collective will of the community. This loss of individual identity was reflected in the clan's social structure and cultural practices. Individual clan members had no personal property, no private relationships, and no independent decision-making authority. Everything was subordinated to the collective goal of producing the perfect child and advancing the genetic evolution of the clan. The clan's collective consciousness also seemed to extend to their relationship with the natural environment. They claimed to be able to communicate with animals, plants, and even inanimate objects, and they demonstrated an uncanny ability to predict and influence natural phenomena such as weather patterns and animal behavior. This connection to nature was reflected in their lifestyle and cultural practices. The clan lived in harmony with their environment, taking only what they needed and giving back through various forms of what they called earth worship. They believed that their genetic evolution was part of a larger natural process that was leading toward the creation of a new form of life that would be perfectly adapted to the Earth's changing conditions. The clan's environmental awareness also extended to their understanding of their own genetic development. They viewed their inbreeding practices not as a violation of natural law, but as an acceleration of natural evolutionary processes. They believed that they were helping nature to create new forms of life that would be better suited to survival in a changing world. This evolutionary perspective was reflected in their long-term planning and goal setting. The clan thought in terms of centuries and millennia, viewing their current generation as simply one step in a much larger process that would eventually produce beings with godlike abilities. They were willing to accept the physical and social costs of extreme inbreeding because they believed that the ultimate benefits would justify any temporary suffering. The clan's long-term perspective also influenced their relationship with the outside world. They viewed normal humans as an earlier stage of evolution that would eventually be replaced by their own genetically enhanced descendants. They felt no obligation to conform to outside social norms or legal requirements because they believed that they were operating under a higher law that transcended human institutions. This sense of genetic superiority was combined with a deep suspicion and fear of outsiders. The clan believed that contact with normal humans would contaminate their bloodline and interfere with their evolutionary progress. They had developed elaborate rituals and taboos designed to prevent genetic contamination and to maintain the purity of their breeding program. The clan's isolation was maintained not only through physical barriers, but also through psychological and spiritual defenses. They believed that their valley was protected by supernatural forces that would prevent unwanted intrusions, and that their ancestors' spirits would warn them of approaching dangers. These beliefs seemed to be supported by the clan's remarkable success in avoiding detection by the outside world. Despite living in an area that was occasionally visited by hunters, trappers, and other travelers, they had managed to remain completely hidden for over a century. Their ability to avoid discovery seemed to exceed what could be explained by luck or careful planning alone. Hartwell's discovery of the clan was apparently the first time that an outsider had penetrated their defenses and gained access to their community. The clan members seemed to view his arrival as a significant event that had been predicted by their spirits and that marked the beginning of a new phase in their development. According to clan prophecy, the arrival of an outsider would signal that the time was approaching for them to emerge from their isolation and begin the process of spreading their genetic gifts to the rest of humanity. The spirits had allegedly predicted that this outsider would serve as a messenger who would prepare the world for the coming of the perfect child and the establishment of the clan's dominion over the earth. The clan's treatment of Hartwell was a mixture of hospitality and careful observation. They provided him with food, shelter, and protection, but they also subjected him to various tests and rituals that seemed designed to evaluate his character and determine his role in their prophetic destiny. These tests included exposure to various forms of psychic phenomena, participation in group rituals, and attempts to induce supernatural experiences through meditation, fasting, and other spiritual practices. The clan members seemed to be trying to determine whether Hartwell possessed any latent supernatural abilities that could be awakened through their techniques. During his stay with the clan, Hartwell experienced several phenomena that he could not explain through conventional means. He had vivid dreams that seemed to provide accurate information about future events. He experienced apparent telepathic communications with clan members, and he witnessed physical phenomena that seemed to violate the laws of physics. These experiences forced Hartwell to question his understanding of reality and to consider the possibility that the clan's claims about supernatural abilities might be based on genuine phenomena rather than delusion or deception. He began to document these experiences in detail, creating a record that would later become one of the most important sources of information about the clan's abilities and practices. Hartwell's documentation of the clan included detailed physical descriptions of each individual, genealogical charts that traced their breeding patterns, and extensive notes about their cultural practices and claimed supernatural abilities. He also created sketches and diagrams that illustrated the clan's physical abnormalities and the layout of their community. This documentation revealed the full extent of the clan's genetic evolution and the systematic nature of their breeding program. The record showed that the clan had successfully concentrated certain genetic traits through generations of careful inbreeding, producing individuals with abilities that seemed to exceed normal human limitations. The documentation also revealed the costs of the clan's genetic experimentation. Many children died in infancy due to severe genetic abnormalities, and those who survived often suffered from physical and mental disabilities that would have been considered tragic in any normal human community. But the clan viewed these costs as acceptable sacrifices in pursuit of their ultimate goal of genetic perfection. They believed that each generation brought them closer to producing the perfect child, and they were willing to accept any amount of suffering and death to achieve this objective. The clan's acceptance of genetic abnormalities and infant mortality reflected their fundamentally different understanding of human value and dignity. They viewed individuals not as ends in themselves, but as components in a larger genetic experiment that was designed to produce superhuman beings. This utilitarian approach to human life and genetic manipulation represented a form of eugenics that was far more extreme than anything that had been proposed by conventional scientists or social reformers. The clan's practices raised disturbing questions about the potential consequences of genetic research and the need for ethical guidelines to govern human experimentation. Hartwell's documentation of the clan's practices and achievements created a record that would influence scientific and ethical discussions about genetics and human enhancement for decades to come. His observations provided evidence that genetic manipulation could produce remarkable results, but they also demonstrated the potential costs and dangers of such experimentation. The clan's story also raised important questions about the relationship between genetics and consciousness, and about the possibility that human potential might be far greater than conventional science had recognized. Their apparent supernatural abilities suggested that consciousness might not be limited by the physical constraints that were assumed by materialistic scientific theories. These questions became even more pressing as advances in genetic technology made it possible to contemplate genetic modifications that could enhance human abilities in ways that were similar to what the clan had achieved through selective breeding. The clan's story provided both inspiration and warning about the potential consequences of such genetic enhancement. The ethical implications of the clan's story extended beyond questions of genetic manipulation to broader issues about human diversity, cultural relativism, and the rights of isolated communities to pursue their own evolutionary paths. The clan's practices were clearly abhorrent by conventional moral standards, but they had also produced remarkable results that challenged conventional understanding of human potential. These ethical dilemmas became even more complex when considered in the context of the clan's apparent supernatural abilities and their claims about spiritual guidance and prophetic destiny. If the clan's beliefs about their divine mission were accurate, then their practices might be justified by considerations that transcended conventional moral frameworks. Hartwell struggled with these ethical questions throughout his stay with the clan and in his subsequent documentation of their practices. He was simultaneously fascinated by their achievements and horrified by their methods, and he found it difficult to reach definitive conclusions about the moral status of their genetic experiment. The clan's story ultimately provided a unique window into the possibilities and dangers of human genetic manipulation and consciousness development. Their achievements demonstrated that human potential might be far greater than conventional science had recognized, but they also showed the terrible costs that could result from pursuing genetic enhancement without appropriate ethical constraints. Hartwell's documentation of the clan created a record that would continue to influence scientific and ethical discussions about genetics and human enhancement for generations to come. His observations provided evidence that challenged conventional understanding of human potential, while also demonstrating the need for careful consideration of the ethical implications of genetic research and experimentation. The clan's story serves as both inspiration and warning for future generations who might seek to enhance human abilities through genetic manipulation or other means. Their achievements demonstrate what might be possible, while their methods serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining ethical standards and respect for human dignity in the pursuit of genetic advancement. In the end, the story of the Crowley clan represents one of the most remarkable and disturbing chapters in the history of human genetic experimentation. Their century-long breeding program produced results that challenged conventional understanding of human potential, while also demonstrating the terrible costs that could result from pursuing genetic enhancement without appropriate ethical constraints. The clan's legacy continues to influence discussions about genetics, consciousness, and human enhancement, providing both insights into human potential and warnings about the dangers of genetic manipulation. Their story reminds us that the pursuit of human improvement must always be balanced against respect for human dignity and the fundamental rights of individuals to live free from exploitation and abuse. The Inbred clan of Arkansas represents America's most disturbing bloodline, not because of their genetic abnormalities alone, but because of what their story reveals about the dark possibilities that exist within human nature and the terrible costs that can result from the pursuit of genetic perfection without moral constraints. Their legacy serves as a permanent reminder of the need for ethical vigilance in all forms of human experimentation and enhancement.